So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. I'm going to be talking about genetic engineering, as you can see by the title. I'm going to give you a little bit of the background as well as the history of genetic engineering, as well as some of the modern applications where you might see it in today's use, as well as some of the future prospects for the field itself. So I'd like to just start out with a simple definition. Genetic engineering is the manipulation of genetic material with the aim of altering a organism's characteristics. This just means that you're using some manipulative technique, whether it be transplanting a gene from one organism to another, or using drugs to alter the effects of a gene, just to have some characteristic effect on an organism. So some of the history. It actually dates back, believe it or not, as far as civilization itself with selective breeding. And that was when humanity first incorporated its first domesticated crops. And back then, corn was just sort of like a grass-like kind of product. And over successive breeding throughout thousands of years, we now have what we know today as regular corn. And Charles Darwin, with his Origin of Species, gives some insight onto how that can be accomplished, as well as Craig Mendel, giving us some insight onto how inheritance can be a factor in that. But the real modern notion of genetic engineering as we know it today started in 1979, there. And that was when insulin from humans, the gene that produces insulin, was transplanted from a human into an E. coli bacteria. And so the idea is this bacteria, which now expresses that gene, produced insulin. And so now you've got a beneficial industrial product which can be sold in the marketplace for diabetic patients who can't produce insulin themselves. Some other history to be noted, you've got Dolly the sheep. A lot of you may have actually heard of Dolly before. This was the first mammal ever cloned. That also opened up a whole different area of genetic engineering, which is more or less focused on how do we control the growth of cells. In that instance, it was a mammary cell from an adult sheep and transplanted into a denucleated embryo. Stem cells are a natural offshoot of that, and they were developed first in 1998. And then the human genome was just recently sequenced in 2003, which was a big feat. Now I'd like to go into some of the modern uses of genetic engineering. Two main things come to mind when I think of genetic engineering in the modern industry. That would be agriculture and pharmaceutics and industrial production. Now, in agriculture, the big thing that everyone's talking about, and actually just heard about the news the other day, is genetically modified crops. And now, genetically modified crops just means that you've got a regular crop like corn that we've been producing and breeding throughout hundreds of thousands of years. And now, rather than taking that breeding process, which is slow because you have to constantly breed one plant with another, and you have to wait for the life cycles to regenerate each successive generation, you can now use genetic modification to make the desired change immediately. And all the successive generations after that express that gene of interest, and it can be controlled a lot better as well. And the reason you can control it a lot better is because you just select one gene. So if you've got a gene of interest, you're just taking that gene and inserting it into your plant of interest. Whereas before, you have two plants that are similar, either same species or similar species, but you're crossing thousands of different genes. And you might get the desired result in one gene, but you might get some other genes that aren't as desirable. So that's a clear advantage there. Also, there's more genes to choose from. So historically, we've been limited to species that we can breed, which are always either very close species or the same species. With genetic engineering, you can literally choose a gene from the entire animal kingdom, take your pick, and you can insert it into a plant or animal and have this desired genetic effect from that gene. And this, in general, just allows us to make plants more adaptive either to weather or the climate or even other animals like parasites or chemicals. And this will make agriculture much more good. So, a couple pictures over here. We've got on basically protects it from the larvae. As you can see, little to no damage on the right, a lot of damage on the left. Now moving on to some industrial products. So these are products that you might actually see on the shelf today or have used. So you've got, as I mentioned earlier, insulin was the first one ever produced. Diabetics need insulin because they can't produce it themselves, and the E. coli allow another mechanism for producing that. Biofuels are a big one. If you go to the gas station to fill up your cars, you'll probably see 10% or less volume percentage of ethanol, right? So the idea is we can break down things like cornstarch into ethanol. By genetically modifying corn, you can, the Swiss actually came up with a type of corn that can break down cornstarch into sugar, and that makes it a lot easier to break down into ethanol, thereby making it a lot more efficient. A couple other products just to note, you got spider silk and human growth hormone. This picture here on the right is actually of a goat, which is not an ordinary goat. It's called a spider goat, and it doesn't shoot spider webs from its wrists or anything. It actually produces spider silk in its milk, and the protein can be extracted to make spider silk, which is a valuable industrial product because of its material capabilities. All right, now to the future. So genetic engineering has a wide breadth that it's expanding into. One of the big ones that we're likely to see here in the next 50 years would be medicine. And we're also likely to see a little bit more industrial products as well as genetically modified crops. So medicine, these are all under research right now. Even stem cells, actually, at the University of Florida, we've got a whole program dedicated to researching stem cells and neuroprogenitor cells, which study how to use stem cells to repair cells and nerves. The idea is, if we can understand how cells differentiate and turn into either tissues or even organs, we can one day maybe make that ear over there. So if you lose your ear or an organ, a better example might be like a kidney. So you have kidney failure. You need a kidney. You can take some stem cells, because everyone has stem cells in their body, even as adults, and you can program those cells to grow into a kidney. And rather than wait in line for the donor list, you can grow your own, and a couple weeks later in the hospital, you'll have your own kidney freshly grown from your own cells. And then gene therapy is another big emerging field in medicine. And that basically means, so there's lots of genetic diseases that we know about now. And the idea is you can find the actual sequence that's responsible for that defect. And you can cut out that sequence and replace it with the proper sequence so that that defect or disease, genetic disease, is no longer there. And that'll also play a big role in future medicine. And then you've also got gene regulation, which more or less we do today actually with the drugs that we take. And that's just using chemicals that we insert into the body to either inhibit or enhance the effects of genes themselves. And the last one I like is personalized healthcare. That one's more of a cost thing. So we have, like I said, in 2003, sequenced the human genome. That cost, I think, like millions of dollars to do. You can now get your genome sequenced, I think, for like 50 grand, I think is what the price is. In another 20 or 30 years, that price might come down to within our range for maybe just $1,000 or even covered by insurance for a couple $1,000. You could get your genome sequenced, and that has a bunch of advantages because not only can you look at any genetic diseases that you may have or that your child may have, you can look for diseases that you might be predisposed for. So like if you're predisposed to gain weight or you predisposed to have cancer, you can know about that right away and you can take corrective action a lot earlier, which can save a lot of lives. And just sort of touching up again on industry, this is a lot more closer to chemical engineering, where you've got useful products that you want to make, but we're using it through the medium of genetically modified organisms. And so bioplastics and biomaterials are already on the market. We're likely to see a lot more of those, so like these plastic utensils over here. The advantages of using this over regular methods are a lot of this stuff can be made at ambient temperatures, so you don't need high temperatures and pressures to make your plastics from petroleum. You also don't need a lot of the acids and bases which are involved in a lot of the organic chemistry to accomplish this. You're just using the material inside of the organism itself, which is a lot safer than nuclear control. Biofuels, I mentioned earlier, that's another big one. We're likely to see plants that can break themselves down even better than we can currently do, or even produce the biofuels themselves. And vaccines and drugs are always a big one. There's always going to be diseases out there, but we're always going to be looking for the vaccines and drugs to fix them. If we happen to stumble upon an Amazonian rainforest plant that has a miracle cure for some disease, but we can only grow it in the rainforest, it doesn't do us much good. With this, we should be able to take the gene, put it into E. coli or some other animal, and mass produce it for the entire world. And then agriculture is also going to be booming here with genetically modified crops. It's basically what we've been doing for thousands of years. It's just speeding up the process a little bit and giving us some more tools added to our arsenal. And this graph over here just shows you some of the increase in acreage across the world in hectares in genetically modified crops. And as you can see, the trend is going up and it will likely continue to do so for years to come. Some of the crops that we're likely to see here in the future are going to have pest resiliency, herbicide resiliency, weather adaptability, and added nutrition. Those are just naming a few. So just to summarize, genetic engineering affects all of us. I mean, it's in the market already in the foods we eat and the products we use. And the capabilities and impact of it are only going to expand as time goes on here. Some really great things